I was sitting in the regional executive's office. Lauren Kendrick sat behind her glass-topped desk, legs crossed, blazer too snug across her petite frame. She was in her 50s, with high cheekbones carefully contoured, one of those women who wore makeup like armor, as if power came in foundation and lipstick. "Ethan," she said, "you do excellent work." But Mason, he just has a way of making people feel comfortable. The staff enjoys working with him more. I heard every word, tried to stay composed as something tight rose in my throat. "So what you're saying is, I didn't get the promotion because I'm not the likable type?" Lauren waved her hand, voice flat. "Don't take it the wrong way. It's about company culture. You deliver results, no doubt, but Mason brings a lighter, more fun atmosphere." I once helped the company save nearly $5 million, rewrote the entire workflow, refined the training systems, made operations run smoother than a Swiss watch. But now I was being passed over because I didn't bring good vibes. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 42. Not young enough to light up a room, but I've been in the game long enough to know this. Results don't need a sugarcoating. They just need to be on time, on target, and on point. The guy they picked over me? Mason? The office comedian. Knows how to make coffee and say just the right thing to the right manager. Early 30s, tall, charming, and Instagram-friendly. Posts latte pics with motivational quotes. Occasionally buys afternoon snacks for the team. Instant hero. I left a career in education to pursue this path. 7 years of non-stop work. Pulled 3 dying contracts back from the edge. Thanks to that, the East Division finally turned a profit. But none of that seemed to matter anymore, not when compared to being pleasant. Lauren looked at me, expecting something polite. Maybe a handshake, at least a nod. I didn't give her either. Instead, I pulled a white envelope from my pocket and placed it on the desk. "My resignation. Effective in 2 weeks." She blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, Ethan. Let's talk about this." I stood, calmly adjusted my collar. "No need. You've made things perfectly clear, and I've made my choice too." I walked out of that office feeling lighter. They thought I left because I was disappointed. But the truth is, I was simply moving on. To a place where value isn't measured by how easy you are to like, but by what you've actually done. Inside the white envelope I left on Lauren's desk, there wasn't just a resignation letter. On the second page, I'd attached a strategic summary, an outline of the internal performance platform I'd been quietly developing for the past 3 years. A system that integrated behavioral data, tracked KPIs in real time, and automatically suggested team adjustments based on each project's unique dynamics, while Alanshire was still fumbling with Excel sheets and Google Forms. But the most important part? 3 weeks ago, the system had officially been granted a federal patent, registration number filed. Since the second quarter of last year, I'd been beta testing it with a retail sector pilot group. And in just 6 months, their team efficiency rose by 31%, while internal costs dropped by nearly $400,000. I never used company time or resources to build it. I worked in silence, on weekend nights, when the city had gone dark, alone in my small Brooklyn apartment. In those moments, I wasn't the guy getting judged for not being sociable enough. I was simply me, someone who never stopped seeking ways to make work smarter, fairer, better. I never told anyone about it. Not out of fear, but because I understood something very clearly. If they couldn't recognize the value standing right in front of them, they'd never see the quiet fire growing inside me. When I stepped out of Lauren's office, the trading floor fell unusually still. A few heads lifted from their screens. Those looks, I'd seen them before. Back in 2018, when Paul, one of the most brilliant systems engineers I've ever known, was let go for not fitting the culture. He wasn't a people person, but he rebuilt the entire CRM system, doubling enterprise sales. Then he vanished. No thank you, no legacy. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. I chose to leave with clarity, on my own terms, with my story. As I passed Mason's desk, I noticed a small bonsai tree. He was clearly ready to move into the role. I gently moved the pot aside, then sat at my own desk, as if it were just another normal workday. I powered up my computer and began backing up everything I'd ever created, every rewritten workflow, every training document, every performance framework I'd refined. Not to take with me, but to make one thing unmistakably clear. I left real value behind. I didn't quit out of disappointment. I left because I knew I had outgrown this place. I know I'm not the only one who's ever been dismissed for not being social enough. The hardest workers, the quietest minds, are often the easiest to overlook. But if you're hearing this story, and you see even a piece of yourself in it, let this be your reminder. Don't wait for someone to recognize your worth. Start building something they can't ignore. On the third day after I submitted my resignation, Mason walked over to my desk. Same look as always, sleeves rolled up, cappuccino in hand, and that smile of someone who just got handed a very nice gift. "Hope you're not upset," he said, trying to sound casual. "I know you were in the running for the role, too." I looked up, met his eyes. No anger, no bitterness, just one sentence, clear, calm, and final. "I don't regret a thing. I just hope you know what you've stepped into." Mason gave a quick laugh, but it faltered slightly, maybe because he realized I wasn't joking. Still, he turned and walked off, like that was the end of it. But I didn't turn away. I went back to my screen, checking through files, not because I needed them anymore, but because I wanted to mark my territory one last time. In the past 3 years, my team and I had cut onboarding time from 22 days to just 9, the fastest in the company. Reduced internal costs by nearly $4.7 million by automating outdated processes. Built 12 performance evaluation models that became standard across branches, some of which had never even heard my name. When Allensher Consulting was spotlighted in the November issue of Business Midwest, those exact results were listed under Most Effective Internal Transformation. But my name was nowhere to be found. The credit went to the East Region Strategy Department, led, of course, by Lauren. I wasn't bitter about being left out. I just understood one thing very clearly. People like me don't get noticed until we're no longer there. Mason didn't know that. He was chosen because he made people feel good, brought cheerful energy, hosted Wednesday bingo and other team-building gimmicks. Me? I didn't host games. I laid foundations. The problem is when someone only knows how to stand on a system without understanding what keeps it running. Then when the wind changes, they won't even realize what's crumbling beneath their feet. Mason thinks he's climbing, but really, he's standing on a structure where I wrote every line of the technical blueprint. And when next year's plan begins to fall apart, I doubt anyone's going to feel very cheerful anymore. That night, I pulled over near Bryant Park, sat there in the dark, engine off, windshield catching the glow from a store across the street. My phone lit up. A message from Tariq, the one person at Allensher who truly understood the value of what I built. "You holding up okay?" I replied with a simple raised hand emoji. He called immediately. No small talk, just spoke. Steady voice with a quiet weight behind it. I knew this day would come, but I still feel bad for the company, not for losing you, but for never realizing what they had. Tariq was the one who used to stay late with me, line editing KPI data models until they were airtight. He was the one who told me, on the day my second proposal got flat out rejected. If they can't use what you built, maybe you should take it somewhere that can. I never forgot that. I just didn't expect that place to come so soon. The first message came through LinkedIn. It was from someone I didn't know. We know that system wasn't Mason's, and we know exactly who was behind it. It was signed, Regional Engineering Lead, Orion Dynamics. We've been observing you long enough to recognize real talent, and your performance architecture is nothing short of remarkable. I just sat there for a moment, staring at the screen. My mind drifted back to the 3 times I submitted formal proposals at Allenshire, each one quietly filed away in the Review Later folder. Back to those meetings where I'd be tweaking KPI tools while Lauren stood at the whiteboard, sketching out team mood tracking charts. I once held out hope that recognition would come from within. Instead, it came from people who'd never even worked with me, yet were the first to see the value I'd created. I met Nathan Brooks at a cafe overlooking the Hudson Pier. No assistant, no small talk. He set down his coffee and slid a brown leather envelope across the table. "Ethan," he said, "we've had our eye on you for about a year now. At Orion Dynamics, we don't hire people for their social ease. We bring in the ones who create what others are too afraid to imagine." I opened the envelope. 3 pages thick. Across the top, printed in bold, Strategic Equity Partnership. Not a job, a role with real influence and a seat at the table. I signed. No hesitation, no advice needed, no calls to mentors. On my final day at Allenshire Consulting, the office was unusually quiet. Everything seemed to move slower. Then a short, internal message from Lauren popped up. "Can you stop by my office for a moment?" I walked in. She sat straight-backed, the printed version of the report I'd attached to my resignation lying on her desk. Pages clipped, sections marked. She'd read it. Thoroughly, just too late. You kept this from us?" Lauren asked, her eyes still on the document. I wasn't surprised. I just shrugged, calm and steady. "I submitted 3 proposals over 2 years, titled Integrated Performance Evaluation System, toward full digital transformation. Each time I got the same feedback. Doesn't align with team culture." Lauren turned a page. Her finger trembled as it landed on the cost-saving projections post-deployment. The final line was clear. Estimated savings, $5.2 million in the first 18 months. "It's patented?" she whispered. "3 weeks ago," I replied, "and it's now under exclusive license with Orion." Lauren leaned back slowly. For the first time, it looked like her chair had lost its grounding. "Ethan, Orion is our competitor." I looked her in the eye. No malice, no triumph, just a truth that needed no emphasis. "And you chose the guy who tells jokes in meetings over the one who saved your company millions without ever needing the spotlight." She said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, but because everything she used to believe about team spirit, cultural fit, and engagement metrics sounded hollow when placed beside the numbers now powering her rival. And that's the funny part. I never hid anything. I just sent it somewhere willing to listen. Lauren didn't lose me to Orion. She lost me to the very decisions she thought were visionary. Lauren tried to keep her voice steady, but I could hear the cracks between her words. "Ethan, if the issue was that we overlooked you, we can fix that. The role of Vice President of Strategic Planning for the Eastern Region. You deserve it." I gave a small nod. At last, the word deserve shows up. Then I paused. My gaze wasn't sharp anymore, just clear with a cold finality. But unfortunately, it's a few years too late, and a few proposals too many pushed aside. It wasn't a retaliation. It was a quiet affirmation to myself that I didn't need a title to know the value had always been there. Outside her office, Mason continued striding around like he was born to lead, every step calculated to radiate confidence. Some patted his shoulder, some chuckled along, and others just stayed quiet, the way people usually do when someone's just been handed a shiny new nameplate. I watched it all and felt no jealousy, only a sense of loss. Not for the position, but for the kind of company Allenshire could have been, one that once held real potential, now handing the wheel to someone who knew how to look capable, but didn't truly understand the machine he was driving. Mason would soon find out. The roadmap I built for next year wasn't sitting in a shared folder somewhere. It was embedded in the training flow, the internal toolkits, the KPI matrix, the coordination protocols, all the moving parts I spent 3 years tuning into place. I didn't take those things with me, but I did take what no one else could replace: the logic behind the system, the strategic depth, and a systems thinking mindset forged not through success, but through failing more times than I can count, and rising every single time. And that doesn't show up in any job description. In my very first week at Orion Dynamics, I was given a core engineering team and full autonomy to build the internal deployment toolkit. No approvals needed. No endless PowerPoint loops. Just one sentence from Nathan Brooks at our kickoff. Do what you've always done, but this time, show us what it looks like at full power. I didn't waste a second. Within 30 days, I integrated the performance platform I had quietly built into 3 of Orion's core divisions, from regional coordination to enterprise client management. Legacy processes were almost entirely removed. We shifted from quarterly reports to real-time tracking, from manual workload distribution to capability-based project analytics, from vague team spirit to hard data, who drives results, and who's draining the system. 3 weeks later, Orion beat Allenshire for a $12.8 million integration contract with Glasstone Group, one of the largest retail conglomerates in the East. I had once led that very account while I was still at Allenshire. When the decision was made public, I got a short email from a Glasstone rep. We didn't choose a company. We chose the person who understands how systems work and doesn't need to say it out loud. From the next quarter on, Orion entered a phase of double-digit growth. Operating profit rose 22%. Project timelines shrank by 40%. But what surprised me most was the internal response. No one called me inspiring. They just sent weekly KPI dashboards with numbers that kept climbing. In a full-staff meeting, Nathan said it outright. We lost 2 contracts to Allenshire and never understood why. Now I know. It was you. 2 months after I quietly left my old company on a calm Monday morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Tariq, the colleague who'd quietly stood by me through the hardest years at Allenshire. You need to read this. I clicked the link. The headline hit me in the face. Allenshire Consulting loses 40% of clients after Q2 system failure. Below it, a blurred image of their headquarters behind a rain-streaked window, and a string of brutal quotes from industry leaders. We used to trust them with our nationwide rollout. Now they can't deliver a basic timeline, said James Kellerman, CEO of Vertex Core Technologies, their largest East Coast client. I didn't flinch, didn't feel triumphant. I just smiled. A soft, bittersweet kind of smile. Tariq messaged again. Mason was just reprimanded in front of the entire board. They said the whole room went ice cold. I leaned back in my chair, feeling more hollow than I expected. Not because I wanted them to fail, but because I once hoped for the opposite, that they would understand, appreciate, and protect the system I spent 3 years building like a giant Lego structure, piece by careful piece. But no, they dismantled each process, replaced them with color-coded spreadsheets labeled modern restructuring. What they didn't get was what I built wasn't a tool, it was an operating architecture. A map that linked real-time workflows, data streams, employee behavior, and customer life cycle into a single, logical web. Not a palette of pastel charts. And so, when the foundation cracked, those who thought they were standing on a stage started sinking beneath the lights. The office door opened. Nathan Brooks walked in, holding the New York Business Daily, turned to page 2. The board just finished voting. They want you as Executive Vice President of Strategic Innovation. I looked at him, slowly closed my laptop. He continued, voice steady. Not just because your system works, but because it's the only thing that kept us from breaking when the market shifted. I nodded. No need for a speech. They once said I was too focused on efficiency. Now it's the very thing keeping this new company standing. That afternoon, while I was reviewing the Phase 2 deployment blueprint for the Asian market, an unexpected email from Lauren appeared in my inbox. The subject line was just 2 words. I'm sorry. I clicked. The message opened, each line still written with the familiar tone of control. But between them, I could feel something real. A quiet admission. Ethan, I was wrong. I've resigned. The board knows everything now. The data, the contributions, it all points back to you. Mason has stepped down. And as for me, I've learned the most painful lesson of my career. Results never come from friendly smiles. I paused for a few seconds, leaning back in my chair. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because, strangely, I felt at peace. I used to think, on the day I finally got an apology like that, I would feel healed. But I didn't. There was nothing left to mend. That chapter was behind me now, and I had gone further than I ever imagined. I typed a short reply. Steady, clear, no hesitation. Thank you. I hope you find something truly worth chasing. Then I hit send. No rereading, no saving a draft. I looked up. On the wall, my system's patent was now carefully framed, complete with the signature of the U.S. Technology Council and the federal copyright seal. On the desk, the tripartite contract with Triaxis Global, Novera Solutions, and Caspian Ventures, 3 Fortune Global 200 giants, sat ready for the international licensing rollout. Lauren? She was now just another name in a long list of people who once failed to see real value. I didn't need them to see it sooner. I only needed myself to keep going, even when no one else could see where I was headed. That morning, I walked into Orion's largest conference room. Every seat was filled. No upbeat music, no empty slogans, just people. Quiet, focused, because they knew they were building something real. I opened my laptop, but didn't start the slides. I stood tall, looked around at every face in the room, and said, I'm not sharing my story for applause. I'm sharing it because I know there are so many people out there, just like me, who've been quietly pushed aside for not knowing how to make others feel comfortable. I paused. So let your results speak. You don't need to toast. You don't need to be liked. You just need to be trusted. The room stayed silent. No one needed to say, that was inspiring. They just understood and got back to doing their part. And for me, that was the deepest form of recognition. Later that afternoon, I drove past Allenshire's old headquarters. The signage on the front window had faded. The word consulting was now just a ghostly blur under the amber light of dusk. On the 5th floor, where I once drafted the full East Coast integration plan, a slanted office space for lease sign was taped carelessly to the window, edges peeling under foggy strips of tape. My phone buzzed, a message from Tariq. The board is talking about asking you to return as CEO. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. No smile, no hesitation. Just one line. Thanks, but I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. I'd once been labeled too focused on outcomes. They said I lacked warmth, lacked connection, lacked flexibility. But it was those very things, clarity, discipline, and refusal to perform, that got me here. And if you, the one listening now, have ever felt like you didn't fit in simply because you weren't good at being likable, if they've ever called you cold, distant, or not a cultural fit, then I want you to remember this. You don't need to go back to prove them wrong. You just need to keep going, to prove yourself right. Don't ask for permission to grow. Don't shrink just because they weren't ready to see you. Keep building. Keep standing firm. Because one day, what you've created will be too valuable to ignore. 3 months after I turned down Allensher's offer to return, a small news piece appeared on the sidebar of Midtown Business Review. Not front-page worthy, but enough to make me pause. Lauren Kendrick, former regional executive director, had just launched a non-profit organization called Value, Not Volume. The group focuses on supporting and mentoring mid-career professionals who were let go after being misjudged, not for their performance, but for lacking stage presence. Quiet achievers who consistently delivered top-tier results, but never quite fit the spotlight. She hosted seminars on bias in modern hiring, sharing her own failures, her misjudgments. No excuses, no deflections. Just one message, written across the homepage of the organization. I once chose the wrong person, and the price I paid wasn't just a job, it was the trust I lost. I can't undo the past, but I can help others avoid repeating it. I never reached out to Lauren again, but I did feel genuinely comforted. Because sometimes remorse doesn't need a second apology. It just needs an action that proves the first one was real. Looking back at my own journey, I've realized not everyone acts out of malice, but many are limited by the narrow lens they've never questioned. And sometimes, the quiet resolve of one person, no matter how silent, can shift an entire system, not by tearing it down, but by building a better version that the old one can't ignore. I looked around my office, now the office of an executive vice president. But what made me proud wasn't the nameplate on the door. It was the people working behind it, engineers, designers, deployment specialists. Not loud, not flashy, but each one carrying a piece of the system farther than I ever dreamed. They weren't hired for how well they talked. They're here because of how well they build. I'm not telling this story to be celebrated. I'm telling it because I know there are thousands out there, like me and like you, the quiet contributors, pushed aside for not matching the culture palette. I'm telling it to remind you, you won't always be seen at the right time. But that doesn't mean you're invisible. Your worth doesn't vanish just because they couldn't recognize it. Sometimes all you need to do is keep going and let time speak for you.